10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 208. Hey everybody, welcome back into episode 208 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, and it is the 1st of May. We made it to May. We've been stuck inside of our houses for quite a while now, hoping that things will start to get better soon, but keep up the faith, and I hope all of you are staying healthy and somewhat happy out there. So this marks the beginning of a new series, as we've been doing here, our month-long series. And I posted a question in the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group a while ago about topics that you guys wanted to see covered on the podcast. And I'm going to start to get to some of those. So the one that we're going to start this month is all about articulation and some of the things that maybe you should be thinking about when you are deciding how to put together your lines and how you want to play them. So before we jump into the episode, I've got a lot of thank yous this week. You guys have been really incredible out there supporting us on Patreon, and I can't tell you how important that is to a show like this and to somebody like me who's just losing so much income due to the lack of gigs and the lack of in-person teaching opportunities. This is really keeping me afloat, so I really just want to thank everybody out there that has decided to join, and for all the people that have been with me for a long time, just thank you so much for that continued support of that $3 a month. It really does make the difference in a time like this. So I want to thank a ton of people this week. Thank you to David, VR, Eric, Mark, Dennis, Doc, Views from Above, Anthony, Joseph, Steve, Rob, Christine, and Joel. We've just seen a huge outpouring of support this week, and thank you. That's about as much as I can say. If you'd like to hop on and start supporting the show, just go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon links, go and get yourself signed up. It only costs you $3 a month to support this show, and you get a PDF with every single episode in return for that. So thank you, everybody, and thank you in advance to anybody that's going over there to sign up. All right, let's jump into today's episode. All right, so articulation, jazz articulation, such an important topic, also a very personal thing. So there's a couple of things I want to say before we actually jump into the meat of this episode. Articulation is a really personal thing from musician to musician. And in fact, articulation can really be the defining characteristic of how somebody plays. So what we're going to talk about is just some ideas. And I think there are a few just general guidelines when it comes to articulating in a swing style that everybody kind of follows. But take this advice for what it's worth and realize at the end of the day, like most things in jazz, you're going to kind of want to take your own spin on this important topic of articulation. So we're going to talk about some sort of maybe universal things when it comes to articulating to make yourself sound as professional as possible. But when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, you really have to develop your own style. So to use an analogy for this particular topic, you can think about some of the concepts that I'm giving you as learning the language as a whole, and then some of the ways that you are going to manipulate this language. You can almost think about it like an accent or a regional dialect, right? You kind of want to start developing your own way of using the language while still keeping the core concepts intact. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody out there. But we're going to talk about a couple of things today, mainly when you have long groupings of eighth notes, what we should be thinking about, and when to switch up the actual length and use a different articulation. So we're going to be dealing with two articulation markings today. One is the tenuto, which, notates that we want to play this stuff legato, very connected. And then the second articulation marking that we're going to be looking at is the marcato, an extremely important articulation marking in jazz, and that is notated by the rooftop style or the upside down rooftop style, depending on where it is in the music. So we're going to use a couple of syllables, and I think that this syllable teaching when it comes to articulation and note length is really, really important. It's a great way to learn it. All you have to do is take these syllables and transfer them as best you can to your instrument. So what we're going to use for tenuto, I'm going to give you two options here. So we are going to either use a la syllable or a do syllable. And the big difference between those is the intensity at the beginning of the note. So if you're saying la through your instrument or playing la on your instrument, there's going to be a very soft attack, really, really soft. And I like that. I like that really soft attack. If you're saying do, you are going to be using a little bit more pointed of an articulation when you say do. I mean, you could hear it when I say it, la, do. So I'm going to leave that up to you, whichever one works the best for you, or whichever one sounds better to your ears. They're both acceptable. Now, we are going to only use one syllable for the marcato, and that is dot, D-A-H-T, dot. And what that does is it shortens the note up a bit, and it does give it a little bit more oomph behind it. So la or do and dot. So we're going to be using those to jump into our examples for this week and illustrate when you should be using each one of those articulations and note lengths. So let's go ahead and look at example 1 on our PDF this week. And what you're going to notice is I have some long eighth note lines written out. Now, you will notice that I have marked every single note with some kind of length and articulation marking. So the first concept that I want to talk about is when you have a long line of eighth notes. So like measure 1 into measure 2 is a perfect example of that. I've got 10 eighth notes in a row. Now, what you'll notice is all of the eighth notes are marked with that tenuto marking, except for the last one. And this is a really important concept in jazz. When you have a long line of eighth notes, generally, you want to play them all very legato. You want to connect them. And you do not want to leave any space in between those. So if I were vocalizing the first measure and the first beat of the second measure of exercise number 1, I would say this: la 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 dot. Or alternatively, if I wanted to use that do articulation, that do syllable, do 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 dot. They're pretty similar, right? I tend to trend towards the do articulation because that just works for me, but you could do either one. Now, the real key here is that I'm not leaving any space in between those eighth notes, and I'm ending the line on a marcato, and that's generally what we do. All tenuto until you get to that last note of the eighth note line. That one is going to be a little bit more separated, a little bit shorter, and it's going to have that dot articulation. So check it out. I'm going to play it on my horn. Now you'll notice that I am tonguing every single eighth note. The difference is I'm not leaving any space. Check out how cheesy it becomes if I start leaving space in between the eighth notes. So I think we can use this as a general rule. When you're playing in a swing style and you have a line of eighth notes, generally you want to play all of them legato except for the last one. We want a pointed ending at the end of a phrase. So now I'm going to play the rest of exercise number 1, example number 1, using that same concept all the way through. And you'll notice that everything is written in, so you should be able to recreate this exactly the way I'm playing it by reading the PDF. So hopefully you can kind of hear that I'm actually saying those syllables through my instrument. I'm coming as close as I possibly can to actually trying to say do every time I play one of those long eighth notes and saying dot every time I'm playing one of those marcatos. All right, so example number 2 has to do with single eighth notes that are just kind of out in space. You know what I mean? Without anything else around them. That's what we're dealing with example number 2. Generally, we want to use the marcato accent on those. So if you see a lot of syncopated eighth notes that are just kind of chilling out without any other notes immediately on either side of it, generally we use dot for that. So if you look at the first 2 measures of example number 2, I'm going to say this. Dot, 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 do, 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 dot. Dot, 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 la, 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 dot. Now you can hear when I did that I think the do sounds better. So I think that might be the way to go. But again, I'm going to leave it up to you. If the la just feels much more comfortable for you, go for it. You can use that. Now you'll notice that we haven't talked about quarter notes because that's a bit of a different topic. We'll talk about that later on. But in that case, the quarter note that you see at the beginning, I am playing as a dot. I just like the sound of that one as that shorter, more pointed dot. So the second example really deals with these eighth notes that are off the beat, just hanging out in the middle of the measure, all by themselves, dot. All right, let me play the rest of example number 2 for you. So hopefully you can hear how that kind of all fits together. And hopefully you agree with me that, this is generally sounding okay. You might have some differing opinions, but I think this is a good place to start with that concept in mind. So when you have a long line of eighth notes, play them legato. It just sounds so much better. It swings so much more. And then on the last note of one of those eighth note lines, hit it with a marcato. And then if you see an eighth note just hanging out in the middle of space, play that with that marcato dot. Now, we're going to get more into some of the spots where that system breaks down a little bit, or how we can creatively step outside of that system on future episodes. But let me know what you thought about this. If you have any questions, please leave them for me in the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group. That is the best place to get in touch with me. And we're going to start moving down these lists of topics that you guys directly told me you want to know more about, and start presenting episodes on each one of those. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you guys are staying safe out there. Stay healthy. Remember, if you want to get the PDF to this episode, see all of those articulations in action, 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon links. Get yourself signed up today. And again, big thank you to all the supporters out there. You guys are amazing, and you keep this show going. All right, everybody, have a great weekend, and we will see you next week. Bye.